You're going to rot in here. The only way you're leaving is feet first." The words of my own son stabbed at my ears like daggers as he pushed me violently into the old country house. The sound of my phone shattering against the wooden floor was the last thing I heard before the lock turned from the outside. Ethan had destroyed my only connection to the outside world, and now I was completely alone, without food, without water, abandoned like an animal in a cage. My heart was beating so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. At 66 years old, after giving my entire life to that ungrateful son, I found myself locked away by his own hands, condemned to die of thirst and hunger, while he went off to enjoy a luxury cruise with Megan, his wife, and that horrible mother-in-law who manipulated him so much. But let me tell you how I got here, how the woman who was once the center of a happy family ended up a prisoner of her own blood. My name is Zelda, and for 40 years I believed I had built a solid family full of love and sacrifice. I worked from the age of 18 as a seamstress in a small textile factory downtown. My hands, rough from so much sewing and embroidering, held our home together when my husband abandoned us when Ethan was just 8 years old. From that moment on, he became my reason for living, the engine that drove me to get up before dawn every morning to get to work on time. I remember perfectly the day I decided I would do anything to give my son the life he deserved. It was a rainy Tuesday in October, and Ethan came home crying because the other kids were making fun of his worn-out shoes. That night, while he slept, I counted every single dollar I had saved for months to buy myself a new dress money I immediately used to buy him the best sneakers in the store. Seeing his smile the next day was worth more than any outfit I could have ever bought for myself. And so the years went by, years went. Every extra dollar, every hour of overtime, every moment of rest I sacrificed, it was all for him. When he turned 16, I worked double shifts to buy him the motorcycle he was dying for. At 21, I mortgaged my small house to pay for his engineering degree. I never complained, I never held it against him. I firmly believed that a mother should give everything for her children, expecting nothing in return but their love and respect. Ethan graduated with honors and got an excellent job at a construction company. I felt like the proudest woman in the world watching him leave every morning in his sharp suit and the leather briefcase. My son is a successful professional, I would tell my neighbors with a smile that came from my soul. During those first few years after his graduation, our relationship seemed perfect. He visited me regularly, took me to nice restaurants for dinner, and always told me how grateful he was for all my sacrifices. Everything changed when he met Megan. The first time he introduced me to her, something inside me recoiled. It wasn't just her cold, calculating attitude, but the way she looked at my son as if he were an investment that needed to be protected from outside influences. Megan was 32, tall, with perfectly styled brown hair and a smile that never reached her eyes. She worked as an administrator at a private clinic, and from the very first moment she made it clear that she considered Ethan's family, specifically me, to be beneath her social standards. During the first few months of their relationship, I tried to get closer to her. I cooked her favorite meals when they came to visit. I bought her small gifts with my meager savings. I even learned to cook sophisticated dishes that I knew she liked. But every gesture of love from me was met with a fake smile and sarcastic comments that my son either didn't seem to notice or, worse, chose to ignore. "Zelda, don't go to so much trouble," Megan would say in that syrupy voice that got on my nerves. "We don't need you to do all this. We're not children anymore." But I could see the disdain in her eyes, the contempt for the old woman who had raised the man she now considered her property. The wedding took place 2 years after they met in an elegant hall that cost over $20,000. I, who had dreamed for years about the day my son would get married, felt like a stranger in my own family. Megan had organized everything without consulting me, from the guest list to the color of the flowers. When I tried to suggest that maybe we could include some family traditions that had been important to us, she looked at me as if I had suggested something utterly ridiculous. "Zelda, darling," she said with that condescending tone I had started to recognize, "this is a modern celebration. I don't think our guests would appreciate those old-fashioned customs." Ethan, who used to defend me from any slight, just nodded and changed the subject. On the wedding day, I sat in the front row, wearing a green dress I had bought at a discount store, feeling small and invisible as I watched my son promise forever to a woman who had already begun to push me away. During the ceremony, when the priest spoke about the importance of family and respect for one's parents, I saw Megan squeeze Ethan's hand with a smile that chilled me to the bone. That night, as I was clearing the plates from the small dinner I had organized at my house for our closest relatives, I overheard a conversation between Megan and her mother in the garden. "Now that we're married, we need to set clear boundaries," Megan said in a voice I had never heard her use in front of me. "Ethan is too soft on his mother. She thinks she can keep controlling his life, but those days are over." "You're right, honey," her mother replied with a cruel laugh. "Men need their wives to open their eyes to these things. A meddling mother-in-law can ruin a marriage before it even starts." I stood frozen behind the window, feeling each word like a slap across my face. The woman I had tried so hard to please, whom I had tried to love like a daughter, was already planning to cut me out of my own son's life. I finished cleaning the kitchen in silence, tears streaming down my cheeks, wondering if Ethan knew what his new wife really thought of me, or if he had simply chosen to ignore it to keep the peace in his marriage. That night, for the first time in years, I went to sleep feeling an emptiness in my chest that I didn't know how to fill. The following months confirmed my worst fears. Ethan's visits became more and more sporadic, and when he did come, it was always with Megan, and for shorter and shorter periods. The conversations that once flowed naturally between us became tense and superficial, constantly interrupted by subtle but hurtful comments from his wife. "Ethan, don't forget we have that dinner with my parents," Megan would say whenever my son seemed to be enjoying our conversation. Or even worse, "Honey, your mother looks tired. Maybe we should go so she can rest." As if I were a decrepit old woman who needed to be cared for, instead of a vibrant woman who just wanted to spend time with her son. But what hurt the most was seeing how Ethan had started to change. The loving, considerate son I had raised was transforming into someone distant, someone who seemed ashamed of his humble origins, and the mother who had sacrificed everything for him. The first time Ethan spoke to me with contempt was on a Sunday afternoon 3 months after his wedding. I had cooked his favorite meal, the same chicken stew he had loved since he was a boy, and I was anxiously awaiting his weekly visit. When he arrived, he was alone, which filled me with hope, thinking we would finally have some quality time as mother and son. But something in his eyes had changed. He was no longer the affectionate young man who hugged me when he arrived, but a stranger who greeted me with a cold kiss on the cheek and sat at the table as if he were fulfilling an annoying obligation. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, as I served the steaming stew in his favorite bowl, the same ceramic bowl decorated with red flowers that I had bought to celebrate his 16th birthday. "Megan and I have been talking, and we think it would be better if we started to have more space." His words hit me like a bucket of ice water. "Space. What does that mean, honey?" I asked, feeling my voice tremble despite my efforts to keep it steady. "Does it mean my constant visits are affecting our marriage?" He answered without even looking me in the eye, focused on stirring the stew as if it were the most important task in the world. "Megan feels like we don't have enough intimacy as a couple because I'm always coming over here." I sat down across from him, feeling my legs tremble. "Ethan, you only come once a week." "How can that affect your marriage? I just want to see you to spend time with you. You're all I have." "That's exactly the problem." He exploded, slamming the spoon on the table with a sharp crack that made the salt shaker jump. "I'm all you have. Don't you realize how suffocating that is? I'm 30 years old." "Mom, I can't keep being responsible for your happiness." His words were like daggers plunging into my heart. The son I had worked day and night for whom I had given up any chance of rebuilding my life after his father left us, was telling me I was a burden on his existence. "I never asked you to be responsible for my happiness," I replied, my voice breaking. "I only asked you to love me as I have loved you. Is that too much to ask?" "Love shouldn't be a prison," he retorted, repeating words that were clearly not his own, but Megan's. "I need you to understand that I have a new family now, new priorities. I can't keep living to please you." That afternoon, Ethan left without finishing the lunch I had prepared with so much love. I was left alone in my small kitchen, looking at the full plate of food slowly growing cold, feeling something inside me break forever. For the first time in my life, I wondered if it had been worth sacrificing so much for someone who now saw me as a nuisance. The following weeks were a silent ordeal. Ethan kept his promise to space out his visits. What used to be a sacred Sunday date became sporadic appearances every 2 or 3 weeks, always with Megan and always in a hurry to leave. During those visits, she made sure to control every conversation, interrupting any moment of intimacy between my son and me with comments about their plans, their trips, their new upper-class friends. "Ethan and I are thinking of buying a bigger house," Megan announced during one of those visits while drinking the coffee I had specially prepared with imported beans that had cost me $30. "Something in the suburbs in one of those gated communities where there's more security and a better class of people." The way she said "better class of people" while looking directly at me made it clear that I did not fit into that category. Ethan, who would have once defended his mother from any implied insult, simply nodded and continued eating the chocolate cake I had baked for him. "And what will happen to this house?" I asked, referring to my home, the place where I had raised my son, where all our memories together were. "Well, it's yours, Mom," Ethan replied with indifference. "You can do whatever you want with it. We won't need it anymore." Those words were like a slap in the face. The house he had considered his home for 30 years was now just a place he wanted to get rid of, an uncomfortable reminder of his humble past that didn't fit with his new upper-middle-class life. But the worst came later, when I thought I had already hit rock bottom in my relationship with my son. Megan had gotten a promotion at the clinic where she worked, and to celebrate they threw a dinner party at their new house, that modern mansion in the exclusive gated community they boasted so much about. I was not invited. I found out by chance when I called Ethan to ask if he could take me to the doctor because they had found an irregularity in my routine tests, and I was scared. "I can't, Mom," he said in a cold voice I didn't recognize. "Megan has an important dinner with people from her work. It's very important for her career." "But can't you take me before the dinner?" I insisted, feeling desperation wash over me. "It would only be an hour at the clinic. I'm afraid to go alone." "Mom, I need to help Megan get everything ready. Can't you ask one of your friends to go with you?" "What friends?" For so many years, I had been so focused on him, on his education, on his well-being, that I had neglected my own social life. Most women my age were busy with their grandchildren, their husbands with lives they had built more balanced than mine. I hung up the phone and sat in my living room for hours, looking at the pictures of Ethan that covered the walls. There he was at 5 with his first school uniform that I had washed and ironed so carefully every day. There he was at 12 proud with the medal he had won in the math competition, the same competition for which I had paid for extra classes by working weekends. There he was at 18, graduating from high school with honors the day I thought all my sacrifices had been worth it. The next day I went to the doctor alone. The results were benign, thank God, but the experience of sitting in that waiting room completely alone, surrounded by other women accompanied by their children or husbands, made me feel the deepest loneliness of my life. When I called Ethan to give him the good news, his response was a curt, "That's good, Mom," before quickly changing the subject to tell me how successful Megan's dinner had been and how they had impressed all the important guests. It was then that I began to understand that I had lost my son forever. He hadn't died, but the loving and grateful man I had raised no longer existed. In his place was an ambitious stranger who was ashamed of his origins and who had chosen a woman that was systematically pushing him away from the mother who had given him everything. The months passed, and the visits became even more scarce. Ethan only showed up when he needed something, for me to hold on to an important document to cook a specific dish to impress Megan's bosses, or to lend him money for some unforeseen expense that their new lifestyle demanded. "Mom, could you lend me $5,000? He asked during one of his rare visits. "It's for the down payment on a new car. Megan's broke down and she needs something more elegant for her job." $5,000 was almost all of my savings, the money I had saved penny by penny for years in case I ever had a medical emergency or needed a major repair on the house. But as always, I couldn't say no to my son. "Of course, honey," I replied, my heart sinking. "When do you need it?" "Tomorrow would be perfect," he said, with a smile that for a moment reminded me of the sweet boy he used to be. "I promise I'll pay you back in 3 months." That promise was never kept. Every time I mentioned the loan, Ethan had a new excuse: unexpected expenses for the new house, a work trip Megan needed to take, car repairs that turned out to be more expensive than planned. The day I hit rock bottom was a gray Tuesday in November, exactly 8 months after the loan he never paid back. I had been battling a terrible flu for a week with a high fever and a cough that tore at my chest. My 66-year-old body didn't respond like it used to, and for the first time in decades, I felt truly vulnerable and scared. I called Ethan hoping he could take me to the doctor again, or at least spend a little time with me to make sure I was okay. His response froze me to the bone. "Mom, I can't come over." "Megan and I have a very important meeting with the architect to remodel the kitchen. It took us months to get an appointment with him. He's the most sought after in the city." "Ethan, please," I begged, my voice hoarse from the fever. "I just need someone to be with me for a few hours. I feel very sick and I'm afraid I might pass out." "Can't you call a neighbor or something?" he replied with an irritation that pierced me like a dagger. "Megan says that independent adults should know how to take care of themselves without constantly depending on others." "Megan says." Those 2 words had become the most painful phrase in my vocabulary. Everything my son thought, decided, or felt now passed through the filter of that woman who had managed to turn my loving boy into a cruel stranger. "I'm your mother, Ethan," I said, feeling tears mix with the fever. "Since when am I others to you?" "Oh, Mom, don't be so dramatic." "It's just a flu. Have some tea and rest. You'll get over it." He hung up without even saying goodbye. I stood there holding the phone for several minutes, feeling something inside me die for good. The son for whom I had sacrificed my youth, my money, my dreams, my chances at love, had reduced me to a nuisance who interfered with his important appointments. That night, as I lay in my bed shivering with fever and feeling more alone than ever, I made a decision that would change everything forever. I could no longer be the begging mother, the woman who pleaded for scraps of attention and affection from a son who clearly despised me. I had to find a way to get my dignity back, even if it meant losing my relationship with Ethan for good. It took me 2 full weeks to recover from the flu. During that entire time, my phone remained silent. Ethan never called once to ask how I was feeling, if I needed anything, if I was even alive. It was my neighbor Amelia, a 70-year-old widow who lived next door, who took care of me. She brought me medicine, cooked me hot soups, and sat with me during the hardest nights. "Zelda," Amelia told me one afternoon, as she helped me change the sweat-soaked sheets, "it's not normal for a son to abandon his sick mother like this. Something is very wrong here." She was right, but admitting it meant facing a truth I had been avoiding for months. My son had become a heartless person, and I had been complicit in that transformation by allowing him to treat me worse and worse without setting any boundaries. When I finally recovered, I decided it was time to act. If Ethan wanted to treat me like a stranger, then so be it. I would no longer be the suffocating mother he described. I would no longer be available every time he needed something. I would no longer be his personal ATM or his emergency cook. The first test came 2 weeks later, when Ethan called me as if nothing had happened. "Mom, could you make me that lasagna that Megan loves so much? Her parents are coming for dinner, and it would be great to impress them with a home-cooked meal." And for the first time in 30 years, I said no. "I'm sorry, Ethan, but I can't. I have other plans." The silence on the other end of the line was so long, I thought the call had been disconnected. "Other plans," he repeated. His tone of disbelief would have been comical if it weren't so pathetic. "What kind of plans could you possibly have?" "My own," I answered with a firmness that surprised even myself. "I'm no longer available every time you need me, especially after you didn't care if I was dead or alive during my illness." "What are you talking about?" "It was just a flu." A flu that could have killed me, and you didn't even call to see how I was. Megan told me it was better to give you space to recover without pressure. He lied shamelessly. Megan says Megan thinks Megan believes. I finally exploded. When are you going to start thinking for yourself, Ethan? When are you going to remember you have a mother who loves you? Don't start with your drama, he yelled back. If you don't want to help me with a simple meal, fine, but don't try to emotionally blackmail me. He hung up violently, leaving me trembling, but for the first time in months, feeling something like relief. The next few days were strange. On one hand, I felt guilty for denying my son something, but on the other, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. I didn't have to watch the phone waiting for his sporadic calls. I didn't have to emotionally prepare myself for his cold, calculated visits. For the first time in a long time, my house was truly mine. I used that freedom to reconnect with Amelia and some other neighbors I had neglected during years of obsessing over Ethan. I started taking walks in the afternoons, tending to my small garden, reading the books I had accumulated but never had time to enjoy. Slowly, very slowly, I began to remember who I was before I became solely Ethan's mother. But my son was not willing to accept this new version of me. 3 weeks after our phone argument, he showed up at my door unannounced with Megan and an expression of fury I hadn't seen on him since he was a teenager. "We need to talk," he said as he walked into my living room without waiting for an invitation. Megan followed him wearing a purple outfit that probably cost more than my monthly salary when I worked at the factory. "Of course, make yourselves comfortable," I said sarcastically, but decided to remain calm. "How can I help you?" "You can start by explaining what's gotten into you lately," Ethan said, sitting on the armchair where he used to curl up as a child for me to read him stories before bed. "First you hang up on me, then you refuse to help me with a simple meal, and now the neighbors are saying you're bad-mouthing us." "Bad-mouthing you?" I asked, genuinely confused. "What have I supposedly said?" "Amelia told her sister, and her sister told the lady at the market that you said I was an ungrateful son who abandoned his sick mother." Megan intervened, her voice faking concern, but dripping with venom. "Do you realize the damage that can do to Ethan's reputation at work?" I was speechless. It was true that I had talked to Amelia about my disappointment with Ethan, but I never thought my words would travel so far, or that my son would be more worried about his reputation than about understanding my feelings. "Your reputation," I asked Ethan directly, completely ignoring Megan. "Is that your biggest concern? Not the fact that your mother felt abandoned when she needed you most." "Oh, please!" Megan burst out before Ethan could answer. "Zelda, you're 66 years old. It's time for you to grow up and stop acting like a spoiled teenager seeking attention." The silence that followed those words was deafening. I looked at my son, waiting for him to finally, after so many humiliations, stand up and defend the woman who had raised him. I waited for him to tell his wife that she had no right to disrespect me in my own home, for him to remember everything I had sacrificed for him. But Ethan remained silent, staring at his shoes like a scolded child. Ethan's silence was more painful than any insult Megan could throw at me. In that moment, seeing my 30-year-old son sitting like a coward while his wife attacked me in my own house, I understood that I had lost the boy I had raised with so much love for good. "I see you have nothing to say," I said directly to Ethan, feeling anger begin to replace the sadness I had carried for months. "I see you're going to let her disrespect me in my own home without lifting a finger to defend me." He finally looked up, but there was no guilt or regret in his eyes, only annoyance. "Mom, Megan isn't disrespecting you. She's just telling you the truth you need to hear. You can't keep living like you're the victim of everything." The victim. I stood up, feeling all the frustration accumulated over the years begin to boil in my veins. Am I the victim for expecting a minimum of respect from my own son? For wanting you to care if I was dead or alive when I had a 104-degree fever? "It was just a flu," he shouted, also getting to his feet. "You couldn't expect me to cancel my whole life for a simple flu." "It wasn't a simple flu. It was your sick and scared mother asking her only son to take her to the doctor." I screamed back, feeling tears of rage begin to roll down my cheeks. "It was the woman who worked double shifts to pay for your college, who mortgaged her house to give you a career, who gave up any chance of being happy so you could have everything you ever wanted. Nobody asked you to do that." His response hit me like a punch to the gut. Nobody asked you to sacrifice your life for me. Those were your decisions. For a moment, the world stopped around me. My own son, the man for whom I had given everything, was telling me that my sacrifices had not only been unnecessary, but unwanted. That everything I had done out of love had been a gigantic mistake that he was now throwing back in my face. "You're right," I said, my voice cold and calm, a voice I didn't recognize as my own, despite the storm raging inside me. "No one asked me to sacrifice my life for you. They were my decisions. Stupid decisions made by a woman who thought a mother's love meant giving everything and expecting nothing in return." Megan smiled with satisfaction, clearly enjoying the spectacle of seeing me destroyed by my own son's words. "I'm glad you finally understand," Ethan continued, cruelly encouraged by what he interpreted as my surrender. "Now maybe you can start living your own life instead of trying to control mine." "Oh, I'm going to live my own life," I assured him, a strange calm washing over me. "In fact, I'm going to start right now." I walked to the small table where I kept my important documents and pulled out the paper I had been avoiding looking at for months. The will I had drafted years ago, in which Ethan was the sole beneficiary of everything I owned. "You know what, son?" I said, holding the document in front of him. "You're right. My sacrifices were my decisions I now deeply regret making. But this house, these savings, this inheritance you were going to receive, those are also my decisions." Ethan's eyes fixed on the paper with an expression I couldn't quite read. "What are you doing?" "I'm making a new decision," I replied, walking towards the paper shredder I had recently bought to get rid of old documents. "I'm deciding that I no longer want a son who despises me to inherit anything from the stupid woman who sacrificed everything for him." "Mom, wait," he shouted, lunging towards me as I slowly fed the will into the machine. But it was too late. The document disintegrated into thin strips that fell into the bin like confetti celebrating my liberation. "What did you just do?" Megan asked, her sharp voice betraying her true concern for the first time. Until that moment, she had been just the cruel wife enjoying the family drama, but now she realized she had just lost a considerable inheritance. "I just did what my son asked me to do," I replied with a smile that came from my soul. "I just stopped making decisions based on a love that is clearly not returned." Ethan was pale, staring at the remains of the will as if he couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. "Mom, you can't do that. This house, your savings, I'm your only son." "Exactly," I said, feeling a strength I didn't know I possessed. "You are my only son, and you just told me that all my sacrifices for you were mistakes that nobody asked for. So now I'm going to correct those mistakes." "You're crazy!" Megan yelled, completely losing her composure. "You can't disinherit your own son just because you had an argument." "An argument?" I looked at her with a calm that surprised me. "Megan, dear, this isn't an argument. This is the result of months of humiliation, contempt, and abandonment. This is what happens when you treat someone like garbage for so long that they finally decide they deserve better." "Mom, please," Ethan pleaded, approaching me with his hands outstretched as if I were a wild animal that needed to be calmed. "You're acting on impulse. You're angry, and you're not thinking clearly." "On the contrary," I replied, stepping away from him. "For the first time in years, I'm thinking with perfect clarity. I'm realizing that raising an ungrateful son was my biggest mistake, but it doesn't have to be my permanent one." "You can't talk to your mother like that," Megan yelled at Ethan, but no longer from a place of moral superiority, but from the panic of seeing a fortune disappear before her eyes. "Say something, fix this." The irony was delicious. The same woman who had spent years poisoning my son against me, who had encouraged every one of his cruelties, was now demanding that he treat me well because their financial future was at stake. "How interesting," I said, watching the growing desperation on both of their faces. "For months, Megan, you've been telling my son that I was a toxic, controlling mother, that I needed to learn to be alone. And now that I'm finally taking your advice, you realize that maybe it wasn't such a good idea after all." "Zelda, I never said those things," She lied shamelessly, but her trembling voice betrayed her. "Of course you said them." And my son, instead of defending himself or his mother, chose to believe every one of your venomous words. He chose to treat me like a nuisance, instead of the woman who gave him life and paid for the education he now uses to earn the money you both love to spend. Ethan slumped back into the armchair, his head in his hands. For a moment, just one moment, I saw a flash of the vulnerable boy he used to be, and my heart almost broke. Almost. "Mom," he said in a small voice, "I know I've been difficult lately. I know I might not have been the son you expected, but you can't punish me like this. We're family." "Family?" I repeated the word as if I were hearing it for the first time. "Do you know what that word means, Ethan? It means being there when the other person needs you. It means mutual respect. It means not letting anyone, not even your wife, humiliate the person who gave you life." I can change," he mumbled, but his words sounded hollow even to him. "No," I replied with a firmness that surprised me. "I'm no longer interested in whether you can change. I'm no longer interested in being the mother who begs for scraps of affection from a son who clearly despises me. I've decided I deserve better than that." "But we're your only family," Megan cried, now playing the emotional blackmail card she had so often criticized when it came from me. "No." I smiled at her, a sweetness that contrasted sharply with my words. "You were my family. Now you are two strangers who came into my house to disrespect me and to claim an inheritance that you will no longer receive." "You can't do this," Megan shouted, completely losing the mask of sophistication she had always worn with me. "That house is worth over $200,000. Your savings are our future." I listened to her talk about our future as if my money, the money I had earned sewing for 40 years, was something that belonged to them by divine right. The woman who for years had treated me like an ignorant peasant was now claiming my inheritance with the desperation of someone who had just watched their life plan vanish. "Interesting," I said, crossing my arms. "Now it turns out my savings are your future. The same woman who told me I was a dramatic old woman who needed to grow up is now here claiming that dramatic old woman's money." Ethan stood up abruptly with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It was a mix of panic rage and something that looked dangerously like a threat. "Mom, you're going to reverse this right now," he said in a low, controlled voice that reminded me of his father in his worst moments. "You're going to call your lawyer, and you're going to make a new will where I am your sole heir." "Or what?" I asked, feeling a strange calm in the face of his threatening attitude. "What are you going to do if I don't, Ethan? Or you'll find out what it means to be truly alone," he answered, approaching me with slow, deliberate steps. "Do you think anyone is going to take care of you when you're an invalid old woman? Do you think you'll be able to keep this house when you're 80 and can't even walk?" His words were like daggers, but they didn't hurt me like they used to. The woman who had endured months of humiliation had died in the last 20 minutes. In her place, someone stronger had been born, someone who finally understood her own worth. I would rather die alone in a nursing home than continue living as the emotional slave of a son who despises me. I replied with a serenity that unnerved him. "I would rather strangers take my money than give it to someone who treats me like garbage." "Are you crazy?" Marlene screamed again. "Completely crazy. Ethan, do something. Your mother has lost her mind." "I haven't lost my mind," I replied, walking towards the front door. "I found it, and now I'm going to ask you to please leave my house." "We're not leaving until you fix this madness," Ethan declared, planting himself in the middle of the living room as if he owned the place. "Then I'll have to call the police to explain the concept of trespassing to you," I replied, heading for the phone. "Don't you dare!" he shouted, snatching the receiver from my hand with a violence that scared me. For the first time in this confrontation, I felt a flicker of real fear. The man standing in front of me was no longer my son. He was a desperate stranger capable of anything to protect what he considered his. "Give me back that phone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Not until you come to your senses," he replied, holding the device out of my reach. "You're going to sit down. You're going to calm down, and we're going to talk about this like civilized adults." Like civilized adults! I laughed, a hysteria bordering on madness. "You're going to teach me about being civilized." The man who just snatched the phone from his 66-year-old mother. "It's for your own good," he yelled. And in that moment, I saw Megan's influence on him completely. Those were words she had used with me many times, always justifying her cruelties as acts of tough love. "My own good," I repeated, feeling the last fiber of motherly love snap definitively in my chest. "For 30 years, everything you've done against me has been for my own good. Marrying a woman who hates me was for my own good. Abandoning me when I was sick was for my own good. Humiliating me in my own home is for my own good." Megan approached us with that fake smile I knew so well. "Zelda, darling, I know you're hurt, but you have to understand that Ethan only wants what's best for you. We all want what's best for you. All of us." I looked at her with a disbelief that was almost comical. "You want what's best for me? The woman who spent 2 years poisoning my son against me. The woman who told me I was a dramatic old woman who needed to grow up. That was just frustration of the moment." She lied pathetically. "You know we care about you very much. You care about me." I repeated her words as if they were a particularly funny joke. "You care so much that my son didn't speak to me for 2 weeks when I was sick. You care so much that you come to my house to demand I reverse a decision I made about my own money." Ethan moved closer, still holding the phone out of my reach. "Mom, listen to me carefully. You're going to make a new will, you're going to leave me this house and your savings, and we're going to forget about this ridiculous conversation." "Or what?" I asked him again, but this time with a smile that visibly disturbed him. "Or you'll find out what it's like to be completely alone," he threatened. "No son, no money, no one who cares about you." "Ethan," I said, moving closer to him until our faces were just inches apart. "I am already completely alone. I've already discovered what it's like to have a son who doesn't care about me. The difference is that now, finally, I've decided to do something about it." Something in my tone must have alarmed him, because for the first time since this confrontation began, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean that you two are going to get out of my house right now and you are never coming back. I mean that I'm changing the locks tomorrow morning. I mean that I'm going to make a new will where all my money goes to charities that help single mothers so that no other woman makes the mistake of sacrificing everything for an ungrateful son." "You can't do that!" they both shouted in unison, a chorus of greed and desperation. "I can and I will," I assured them. "And if you ever think about bothering me again, I will call the police and tell them exactly what kind of people you are. I'll tell them how you treated an elderly woman, how you threatened her in her own home, how you snatched the phone from her when she tried to call for help." Ethan stared at me for a long moment, and for an instant I thought that maybe finally he would react like the son I had raised. I thought he would give me back the phone, that he would apologize, that he would remember who I was to him. Instead, he threw the phone against the wall with so much force that it shattered, filling my living room with broken plastic and mangled wires. "There's your phone," he said with a cruel smile that chilled me to the bone. "Let's see you call the police now." The silence that followed was absolute. The three of us stared at the remains of the phone scattered on the floor, a perfect metaphor for what was left of our family relationship. "Ethan," I said, my voice sounding strangely calm even to myself, "you have just crossed a line of no return." "Oh, really?" he challenged, puffing out his chest like a street thug. "And what are you going to do about it, Mom? You have no phone. You have no one to help you. You are completely at our mercy." Megan smiled with satisfaction, clearly enjoying the spectacle of seeing me finally subdued and humiliated, just as she had planned for so long. What neither of them knew was that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. I stared at the fragments of the phone for several seconds, feeling something fundamental shift within me. It wasn't fear I felt anymore, or sadness, or even rage. It was something much more dangerous. An absolute calm, the serenity of someone who has finally seen the true nature of the people in front of them. "You know what, Ethan," I said, bending down to pick up one of the largest pieces of the destroyed phone. "You're right. I have no phone. I have no one to help me." "I am completely at your mercy." His smile widened, interpreting my words as a surrender. "I'm glad you finally understand the situation." "Oh, I understand it perfectly." I continued, holding the fragment of broken plastic as if it were a precious relic. "I understand that my own son has just destroyed my only means of communication with the outside world. I understand that he is threatening me in my own home. I understand that his wife is here enjoying every second of my humiliation." Megan approached with that triumphant expression she had been waiting so long to show me. "Now maybe you can be reasonable, Zelda. Making that new will is the only smart thing you can do in this situation." "You're right," I replied, dropping the piece of the phone. "That's exactly what I'm going to do." The two of them exchanged a look of satisfaction, believing they had finally broken me. They had no idea that what had just broken was not my will, but the last chains of love that tied me to them. "Perfect," Ethan said, relaxing his shoulders. "I knew you'd come to your senses. We'll go to the lawyer tomorrow morning and sort all this out." "Tomorrow," I repeated, nodding slowly. "Of course tomorrow. And in the meantime," Megan added with that venomous smile, "maybe you should reflect on how you've been behaving lately. A little humility would do you good." "Humility," I murmured. "Yes, I definitely need more humility." Ethan headed for the door, clearly pleased with the outcome of his intimidation. "We're leaving now, but we'll be here early tomorrow to pick you up, and you'd better be ready to cooperate." "Of course," I assured them, following them to the exit. "I'll be completely ready." Megan paused at the threshold and looked at me with that condescension she had perfected. "Zelda, I know this has been difficult for you, but one day you'll thank us for opening your eyes. Sometimes tough love is the only thing that works." "Tough love," I repeated her words. "Yes, I definitely need to learn more about tough love." They left without saying goodbye, leaving me alone in my house with the remains of my phone and something much more important: absolute clarity about who the people who had just walked out my door really were. I waited until I heard the sound of their car driving away before I moved. Then, with a calmness that surprised me, I went to my room and pulled out the cell phone from under my mattress that I had secretly bought 3 months ago after realizing I needed a way to communicate that Ethan didn't know about. I dialed the number of Amelia, my neighbor. "Amelia, it's Zelda. Could you come over to my house? I need your help with something urgent." 20 minutes later, Amelia was sitting in my living room staring at the remains of the phone with an expression of absolute horror. "Zelda, this is very serious. Your own son threatened you and destroyed your phone. We have to call the police." "No," I said, pouring her a cup of tea with perfectly steady hands. "Not yet." "What do you mean, not yet? This is domestic violence. It's intimidation." "You can't let them treat you like this." "I won't," I assured her, "but I'm going to handle it my way." Amelia studied me with those wise eyes of hers, trying to understand what I was thinking. "What do you have in mind?" "They think they've broken me," I explained, a strange smile forming on my lips. "They think that tomorrow I'm going to go like an obedient lamb to make a new will leaving them all my money. And you're not going to do it." "Oh, I'm definitely going to do it," I said, and my smile widened. "But it's not going to be the will they're expecting." I explained my plan to Amelia, who at first tried to dissuade me, insisting it was too risky. But when I told her all the details of how they had treated me over the past few months, when she saw the remains of the phone and truly understood what had happened that afternoon, her expression changed completely. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she finally asked. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I replied. "For 30 years I've allowed myself to be treated badly for fear of losing my son's love. But today I realize that love was lost a long time ago. What's left isn't love. It's habit, convenience, and greed." Amelia nodded slowly. "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to be my witness," I said. I need you to see exactly how they behave with me so that when it's all over, you can testify to what really happened. I couldn't sleep that night, but it wasn't out of fear or anxiety. It was because of the strange sense of freedom I was experiencing. For the first time in decades, I was going to take full control of my life. I was going to show Ethan and Megan that they had completely underestimated the woman they thought they had tamed. At 6 o'clock the next morning, I called the lawyer who had drafted my original will. I explained that I needed to make some urgent changes and asked him to come to my house that same morning before Ethan and Megan arrived. "Are you sure about these changes, Mrs. Zelda?" the lawyer asked, after reviewing the new instructions I had given him. "They are quite drastic." "Completely sure." I confirmed, signing each page with a determination I hadn't felt in years. And I wanted to be absolutely clear that I am making these decisions in full possession of my mental faculties without coercion of any kind. Understood. The documents will be filed immediately. At 10 o'clock in the morning, just as they had promised, I heard Ethan's car pull up in front of my house. Amelia was hidden in the kitchen from where she could hear everything that happened in the living room. My cell phone was recording hidden among the sofa cushions. I opened the door before they knocked with a perfectly acted expression of resignation. "Good morning," I said in a submissive voice. "I was expecting you." Ethan entered with the conqueror's arrogance he had shown the night before. "Perfect. I see a night of reflection helped you see things clearly." "Yes," I murmured, keeping my gaze lowered. "I understand perfectly." Megan studied me suspiciously, as if sensing that something wasn't quite right, but the defeated woman act I was putting on seemed to convince her. "Did you call the lawyer?" Ethan asked me. "He's already been here," I informed them. "The new will is already done." The two exchanged a look of absolute triumph. They had won, or so they thought. "Excellent," Megan said, sitting on my sofa as if she owned the place. "And what exactly does it say?" I showed them a copy of the document, watching their eyes light up as they read the first few lines. What they didn't know was that what they held in their hands was a fake copy prepared specifically for this moment. "Perfect," Ethan murmured, reading about his complete inheritance. "I knew you'd come to your senses." "Yes," I said, feeling the adrenaline begin to pump through my veins. "I've completely come to my senses." "Now that this is settled," Megan said, putting the fake copy of the will in her purse like a trophy, "we need to talk about some other practical matters." "What kind of matters?" I asked, perfectly maintaining my act of a submissive, defeated woman. "Well," Ethan interjected, settling into the armchair as if he were the new owner of the house, "now that we know this property will eventually be ours, Megan and I have been thinking that maybe it would be better if you moved to a place more appropriate for your age." "Appropriate for my age," I repeated, feeling the rage begin to boil in my veins, but keeping my voice calm. "Yes, Mom. A place where you can get the care you need, a retirement home maybe, something with medical staff available 24 hours. Megan nodded enthusiastically. "We've been looking at some very good options, places where you can socialize with people your age, where you won't have to worry about maintaining this big house." "I see," I murmured, clenching my fists behind my back. "And when would I have to make this transition?" "Well," Ethan said, exchanging another knowing glance with his wife, "we were actually thinking the sooner the better. This house needs some major renovations if we're going to sell it for what it's really worth." "Sell it?" I looked at them with feigned confusion. "But I thought you wanted it for yourselves." "Oh, no," Megan replied with a laugh that made my teeth grind. "This house is too old, too small for our needs, but the land is excellent, very well located. With the right renovations, or better yet, demolishing it and building something modern, we could get almost $400,000. There it was, the complete, ruthless truth. Not only did they want to kick me out of my own home, but they planned to erase every trace of the life I had built there, every memory of the years I had spent raising my son within these walls. $400,000, I repeated slowly. "That's a lot of money." "Exactly," Ethan confirmed. "And with your savings, which according to the will amount to $150,000, we'd be talking about over $500,000. That's enough for Megan and me to buy our dream house in the best neighborhood in the city. Your dream house, I murmured, feeling each word like a slap. And me, where do I fit into these dreams? You'll be perfectly cared for at the home, Megan assured me with that perfected condescension. You'll have everything you need. Food, a roof over your head, medical care. What more can a woman your age ask for? What more can she ask for? Maybe respect. Maybe gratitude. Maybe that the son for whom I sacrificed my entire life wouldn't treat me like an old piece of furniture to be discarded. And when would all this be ready? I asked them, still maintaining my act. Actually, Ethan said, looking at his wife as if asking for permission to continue, we've already made some calls. There's a very good home on the outskirts of the city that has immediate availability. We could take you tomorrow to see it. Tomorrow. The speed with which they had organized my exile left me breathless. Isn't that a bit rushed, Mom? Ethan said with that forced patience used on difficult children. The longer we wait, the harder it will be for you to adapt. It's better to make the change quickly, like ripping off a Band-Aid. Like ripping off a Band-Aid. That was the metaphor my son had chosen to describe the moment he would uproot me from my home, from my memories, from everything that had been my world for 4 decades. Besides, Megan added, we've already contacted some contractors to come and assess the property. One of them can come next week, but we need the house to be available. Available, I repeated, without me in it. Exactly, she confirmed with a smile that made no attempt to hide her satisfaction. I felt a chill. I remained silent for several minutes, pretending to process all the information they had given me. In reality, I was savoring every second of this conversation, recording every cruel word, every ruthless plan, every display of the greed and contempt they had been hiding behind their masks of filial concern. You know what? I said, finally getting up from the sofa with deliberately slow movements. I think you're right. I think it's time for me to accept the reality of my situation. The two of them visibly relaxed, interpreting my words as the total surrender they had been seeking. I'm glad to hear you say that, Ethan said, also standing up. I know it's hard, but in the end, you'll be happier this way. Happier? I nodded. Yes, I'm definitely going to be happier. So tomorrow we're going to see the home, Megan asked, already pulling out her phone to make some kind of arrangement. Tomorrow, I confirmed. But first, there's something I need to show you. Something important I found when I was organizing my things for the move. What is it? Ethan asked with sudden interest. It's in the basement, I explained, heading towards the door that led to the stairs. It's something that belonged to your grandfather, something I thought you'd like to have as a family keepsake. Curiosity got the better of any caution they might have had. They both followed me to the basement down the wooden stairs that creaked under our feet. The basement of my house was a place Ethan had avoided for years. As a child, he had an irrational fear of dark, enclosed spaces, and as an adult, he had simply decided he had no reason to go down there. What he didn't know was that I had turned that space into my private sanctuary, the place where I kept all my most precious memories, and some other items I had been accumulating over the years. It's a little dark, I said, turning on the light on the stairs, but leaving the rest of the basement in shadows. Be careful where you step. We reached the bottom of the stairs, and I turned on the main light. The basement lit up, revealing what I had been preparing for months without their knowledge. What is all this? Megan asked, looking around with a mixture of confusion and alarm. The walls were covered with photographs, documents, and newspaper clippings, but they weren't normal family memories. They were evidence. Photographs of the bruises I had after the times Ethan had pushed me during our arguments. Copies of bank statements showing all the loans he had never paid back. Recordings of conversations where he and Megan spoke contemptuously of me, thinking I couldn't hear them. This is my archive, I explained with a calm that starkly contrasted with the growing panic on their faces. Everything you've done, everything you've said, everything you've planned, it's all here. Ethan walked over to one of the walls, reading some of the documents with a paleness that gave me immense satisfaction. "Mom, what is this? Why? Why did I document everything?" I finished his question. "Because I knew that eventually I would need proof of who you two really are." Megan had found the transcripts of some of their cruelest phone conversations I had secretly recorded over the last few months. "This is illegal," she shouted, holding the papers with trembling hands. "You can't record private conversations." "Actually, I can," I informed her. "In my own house, I have the right to record any conversation, and considering I was documenting emotional and financial abuse, any court would find it completely justified." The silence in the basement was deafening. Ethan and Megan moved between the evidence-covered walls like zombies reading transcripts of conversations where they had planned my future without consulting me, looking at photographs that documented every humiliation, every moment of contempt they had made me suffer. "This over here," I said, pointing to a particular section of the wall, "is all the times you asked to borrow money and never paid me back a single cent. In total, you owe me $47,000. Ethan approached the documents, his face growing paler by the second. "Mom, those weren't loans. They were family help." "Family help?" I laughed with a bitterness that came from my soul. "Is that what you call theft now? Because I have recordings here of you promising to pay me back every penny." Megan had found the most compromising photographs, images of her going through my drawers without permission during her visits, documents proving she had been investigating the value of my property without my knowledge, even screenshots of her text messages making fun of me with her friends. "How did you get this?" she asked, in a voice trembling with pure rage. "Your mistake, dear Megan, was completely underestimating the dramatic old woman you thought you had tamed," I replied. "Turns out this old woman learned how to use security cameras, recording apps, and many other modern tools during the months you thought she was losing her mind." In the center of the basement was a table with something neither of them had noticed until that moment, an open laptop with an active video call. "What is that?" Ethan asked, approaching the screen. "Oh, that," I said with a smile that came from my heart. "That's my life insurance." For the last 20 minutes, everything we've talked about up here and down here has been broadcast live to several very important people. The screen showed multiple video windows, a lawyer specializing in elder abuse, a social worker, Amelia, from my kitchen, and to my utmost satisfaction, Michael, my neighbor who worked as an investigative journalist for the local newspaper. "Zelda!" the lawyer exclaimed from the screen. "Are you okay? Do you need us to call the police?" "I'm perfectly fine," I replied, never taking my eyes off the looks of absolute horror on Ethan and Megan's faces. In fact, I've never felt better. "Turn that off!" Megan screamed, lunging for the computer, but I was faster and closed it before she could reach it. "Too late," I informed her. "Everything is already recorded and saved in multiple locations. Your plans to put me in a home, your comments about demolishing my house, your confession about the $400,000 you expect to make from my property, everything." Ethan slumped into an old chair I had in the basement, his head in his hands. "Mom, what have you done?" "What I should have done months ago," I replied. "Protected myself from you two." "You can't use any of this," Megan shouted, waving the papers she had been reading. "They're private conversations. It's an invasion of privacy." "My dear," I said with infinite patience, "documenting abuse is not an invasion of privacy. It's survival." I walked over to another section of the wall where I had hung something that filled them with even greater terror: copies of recent legal documents. "These here are particularly interesting," I continued. "These are the lawsuits I'm filing next week. One for financial elder abuse, another for intimidation and threats, and this last one for property damage for the phone you destroyed yesterday." "You're crazy!" Ethan shouted, standing up abruptly. "I'm your son. You can't sue your own son." "My son." I looked at him with a coldness that made him flinch. "My son died months ago, Ethan. The person standing in front of me is a stranger who threatens me, destroys my things, plans to steal my inheritance, and put me in a home against my will." Tears began to roll down my cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of liberation, of justice, of a satisfaction I had been waiting to feel for far too long. But that's not all. I continued moving towards the most important document of all. This one here is my favorite. I showed them a copy of the real will, the one I had signed that morning with the lawyer. Remember the will I showed you upstairs? It was a fake. This is the real one. Ethan snatched the document from my hands, reading it with a desperation that gave me more pleasure than I had felt in years. "It can't be," he murmured, reading line by line. "You can't have done this." "What does it say?" Megan asked, trying to read over her husband's shoulder. "It says, I informed them with a radiant smile that all my property and my savings will go to a foundation for single mothers struggling to educate their children. It says that not a single cent will go into the hands of people who treat the elderly like garbage." Megan turned completely pale. "You can't do that." We're your family." "My family." I laughed until my ribs ached. "My family doesn't threaten me. My family doesn't plan to put me in a home so they can sell my house. My family doesn't destroy my things when they don't get what they want." "Mom, please," Ethan begged, and for the first time in months, I saw something that resembled the son I had raised. "I know we've been difficult with you, but I didn't know you felt this way." "You didn't know—" I snatched the will from his hands. "You didn't know when you hung up on me while I had a fever? You didn't know when you let your wife insult me in my own home? You didn't know when you threatened to leave me completely alone if I didn't do what you wanted?" I was just frustrated," he stammered. "I didn't mean those things." "But you said them, and you felt them. And for months you treated me as if I were a nuisance you had to tolerate until you could finally get rid of me." Megan had started to cry, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of pure rage and frustration at seeing her perfect plan crumble before her eyes. "This isn't over," she shouted. "We're going to contest that will. We're going to prove you're not in your right mind." "Go ahead," I said, moving closer to her until we were face to face. "Try to prove I'm not in my right mind. Try to explain to a judge why a woman who meticulously documented months of abuse and neglect doesn't have the right to decide what to do with her own money." The silence that followed was absolute. They both finally understood that they had lost, that their greed and cruelty had been their downfall. "Besides," I added, heading for the stairs, "you forget that all of this is going to be published in the newspaper next week. Michael already has all the material he needs to write a very interesting article about elder abuse in middle-class families. Your names, your photos, your own words describing your plans for me." "You can't do that," Ethan shouted, following me up the stairs. "That will ruin my career." "You should have thought of that before you threatened your mother," I replied, without turning to look at him. We reached the main floor of the house where Amelia was waiting for us with an expression of absolute satisfaction on her face. "How did everything go?" she asked, although the devastated expressions on Ethan and Megan's faces had already given her the answer. "Perfectly," I replied. "I think our guests are ready to leave." Ethan and Megan stood in my living room like statues, processing the magnitude of what had just happened to them. All their arrogance had vanished, replaced by a desperation that would have made me feel sorry for them if I hadn't been savoring every second of their destruction. "Mom," Ethan said in a broken voice I hadn't heard since he was a child, "there has to be a way to fix this." "We're family. We can find a solution." "A solution?" I looked at him with a calm that starkly contrasted with his panic. "The only solution that existed was for you to treat me like a human being. You had that chance for months and you wasted it every single day." Megan had started pacing, muttering to herself about lawyers and legal appeals, completely unable to accept that they had been defeated by the dramatic old woman they had so underestimated. "Zelda," she said finally, trying to regain some of her former composure. "I know we've had our differences, but this is too extreme. You're destroying your own family." "I didn't destroy anything," I replied. "You destroyed this family the day you decided my love was a burden and my money was your right. I'm just documenting the destruction you had already caused." Amelia came to my side and put a protective hand on my shoulder. "Zelda, I think it's time for them to go." The police are on their way to take a formal report about the intimidation and the broken phone. The police. Ethan turned even paler. Mom, please don't do this. My job, my reputation, everything will be ruined. Your reputation. I repeated his words with genuine disbelief. Until the very end, the only thing you care about is your reputation. Not the pain you caused me. Not the years I wasted loving you unconditionally. Just your precious reputation. It's not just that, he shouted, and for a moment I saw a flash of the violent temper he had shown the day before. It's my whole life, my career. Everything I've worked for. Everything you've worked for, I murmured, walking to the window where I could see the flashing lights of the police car approaching down the street. You mean the career I paid for with my savings? The job you got thanks to the education I financed by working double shifts? The sound of the sirens grew louder, and both Ethan and Megan instinctively moved towards the door, like frightened animals looking for an escape. Don't leave yet, I said with a smile that must have been terrifying. I want you to stay and meet the officers. I want you to explain personally why you thought threatening a 66-year-old woman was a good idea. The police knocked on the door at exactly 3 p.m. 2 young officers who listened to my story with a seriousness that filled me with satisfaction. Amelia corroborated everything she had witnessed, and the audio recordings I had made were accepted as preliminary evidence. Mrs. Zelda, one of the officers said after taking all the information, do you want to press formal charges against your son and daughter-in-law? I looked at Ethan, who was sitting on my sofa with his head in his hands, completely defeated. For a second, just 1 second, I felt a flicker of the maternal love that had defined my life for so many years. Then I remembered his words from the day before. Nobody asked you to sacrifice your life for me. I remembered the cruel smile with which he had destroyed my phone. I remembered the plans they had made to put me in a home without consulting me. Yes, I replied to the officer in a firm voice. I want to press formal charges. The legal process that followed was exactly as devastating as I had hoped. The local newspapers covered the story in great detail, especially after Michael published his investigative article titled The Cost of Lost Love When Children Become Predators. The company where Ethan worked fired him after the scandal reached his supervisors. Megan lost her position at the clinic when the administrators decided that a person involved in elder abuse was not appropriate for a medical environment. But what gave me the most satisfaction was not their professional ruin, but something much simpler and more personal. One afternoon, 3 months after all the legal drama, Ethan showed up at my door. He was alone without Megan, with a defeated expression that would have broken my heart under other circumstances. Mom, he said when I opened the door, can we talk? I looked at him for a long moment, studying his haggard face, his deep dark circles the way he had aged years in just a few weeks. No, I replied simply. We can't. Please, he begged, and tears began to roll down his cheeks. I've lost everything. My job, my reputation, my marriage. Megan left me last week. I have nothing. Now you know how it feels, I said with absolute calm. Now you know what it's like to lose everything because of someone who supposedly loves you. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. I know I was terrible to you. I know you didn't deserve any of what we did to you. But I'm your son. There has to be some way to fix this. For a moment, I felt the familiar temptation to comfort him, to open my arms and forgive everything as I had done so many times before. But then I remembered something I had learned during these months of freedom. Forgiveness without consequences is not love. It is cowardice. Ethan, I said, keeping the door ajar. For 30 years, I forgave you every cruelty, every slight, every moment you treated me as if I were less important than anything else in your life. I forgave you because I thought that's what loving mothers do. Exactly, he exclaimed, trying to get closer. You're my mother. You love me. I loved you, I corrected him. I loved the sweet boy who used to hug me when he had nightmares. I loved the ambitious young man who promised me that one day he would pay me back for everything I had sacrificed for him. But that boy, that young man, they died a long time ago. The person standing in front of me is a stranger who chose greed over love, who chose cruelty over gratitude. "I can change," he cried desperately. "I can be the son you want me to be again." "I don't want you to change for me," I said, starting to close the door. "If you ever change, let it be for yourself, because you realize that the person you became is despicable, but it's no longer my responsibility to fix you." "Mom, please." He put his foot in the door, preventing me from closing it completely. "You can't abandon me like this. I'm your only son." "No," I replied with a firmness that surprised even me. "You abandoned me. I'm just officially acknowledging something that happened months ago." I gently but firmly pushed his foot away and closed the door. I heard his sobs on the other side, his pleas, his promises of change that came far too late. I stood on the other side of the door for several minutes, listening as the man who had once been my reason for living completely fell apart on my porch. Part of me wanted to open it to comfort him, to go back to being the mother who forgave everything. But a stronger part, the part of me that had been reborn in that basement full of evidence, the part that had learned to value herself, stood firm. Finally, I heard his footsteps walking away, the sound of a car starting, and then silence. I went to the kitchen where Amelia was waiting for me with a hot cup of tea and a proud smile. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Free," I answered, taking the cup, with hands that no longer trembled. For the first time in 30 years, I feel completely free. That night, as I prepared for bed in my house, which no one would ever take from me, I reflected on everything that had happened. I had lost my only son, but I had gained something infinitely more valuable, my dignity. At 66, I had learned that self-love is not selfishness, but survival. I had learned that setting boundaries is not cruelty, but necessity. I had learned that sometimes the only way to save what's left of your soul is to cut the ties that are destroying you. I gave everything for a son who saw me as a walking ATM machine, but now finally I was going to give everything for the only person who truly deserved it, myself. And for the first time in decades, that prospect didn't scare me. It excited me.